Are we good?
Oh, look at that. It's a lovely little scene for us.
Lovely little setup.
Oh, nice.
Perfect.
All
All right, we good?
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, class. So this is our upcoming poetry unit.
Yep.
And I'm stepping aside for about a week for graduate school studying poetry. And so I'm handing off the class to co-teach, more or less, with Miss Ellis. She leads all the curriculum here at CCS, is a poet extraordinaire, and is going to be guiding you through this. So anyway, Miss Ellis, you want to tell us maybe just a little bit about yourself, your background in poetry, what got you interested in poetry?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, and just so you guys know, Mr. Harvey and I have done this before. We had an opportunity right when he was starting out to overlap for a couple of months teaching 10th grade English, this class together. Yeah, so it's really fun for the reunion tour here during virtual school. So let's see, a little bit about my experience with poetry. Before coming to CCS, I taught English for somewhere around 15 years. I've taught 9th grade, I've taught 12th grade AP, I've taught 11th grade American Lit, I've taught middle school, and so in that, one of the things I've always been interested in is how do you help students see and understand the whole range of texts that we're dealing with, right? So there's a long epic poem, there are shorter texts, and I have found poetry to be a way to take a few minutes and experience a depth and sort of a power that doesn't always come from other texts, like a novel, right? So if I'm going to read a book, I want to just get absorbed and lost in the story. And I feel like when I'm encountering a poem and taking these sharp, beautiful images and holding them up to them a little bit more closely, like I can offer something really colorful. Is that a good?
It does.
Okay.
And you did not teach English at New York, right?
I did not. No, I taught in Annapolis, Maryland for 6 years. I taught in Indonesia for 1 year. Yeah, I taught in Frederick, Maryland for 2 years, and I taught in Iowa for 5 years. So it's been a little bit all over the place.
It's a little Iowa tour.
That's right. So glad to be landed in Chattanooga.
I love that. So maybe a good place to start out for both of us to kind of share our opinions or our definitions.
Yeah.
How would you define poetry?
Great.
That's always kind of tricky. It's a tricky thing to define.
It is, and I don't think there's one exact definition. A lot of times we want to start with, it's language that rhymes. Yeah. Not everything that rhymes is a poem, and not every poem rhymes. So that definition, it's not going to work as a boundary. So that's out. It's short. Well, not all poems are short. They've read the Odyssey. Yeah. They know that poems are short, right? Yeah, there are lots of novels shorter than that poem. So that's not going to work. It's not that it's short. It's not that it rhymes. Here is what I think it does. And most of the poems that we're going to look at in this unit are lyrical, right? They're dealing with emotions and experiences. There are lots of other kinds of poems. I think, was it Matthew Arnold? I'm not going to get the name right, but if prose is words in their best order, poetry is the best words in their best order. So I know for sure that one of the things we're going to deal with as we talk about poetry is the sense of like that exact word, right? So like in poems, the particular choice of language matters so much more often than it does in a narrative, right? Yeah. So I think of like orange juice or apple juice, like the kind that comes from that like concentrated can. Yeah, like you dump it in and you add a whole bunch more water. Poetry is like that concentrated can. All the extra stuff is out. If a novel is like a big cup of coffee, poetry is an espresso. Right? It is like distilled, compact, every sip, every bit matters. And so it takes a lot more time to really slow down and say, that word, why that word? This setup, why that setup? So like the precision, the emphasis, and that's not intended to be like overbearing or intense. I think poets are people who are playing with language.
The playground.
Yeah. So I really love that. What about you?
Let's see. My journey to poetry. Wasn't really a fan in high school.
Okay.
And that's not to just say that you won't be. I just wasn't. My English teacher was good, but didn't light that fire for me. And that says more about me than it does about her. I was into baseball, and that was kind of where my love was. Went to Covenant, had a professor there that really sparked something in a class called Metaphorical Truth, and Dr. Tate.
Nice, I know him.
And so kind of fell in love with it there. And I think for me, when I think of what poetry is, I think of the poet as someone who takes the material around him or her and uses it to tap into something bigger than that.
Oh, I like that.
Something transcendent. And so there's a quote from Joseph Campbell, the mythologist who I love. And he says, the most important truths are inexpressible. And the second most important things are the metaphoric attempts to point to those.
Okay.
And so I think that's what poetry is. It's metaphorical attempts to point to something bigger than what we can understand about those attempts.
Oh, I love that, and I've not made this connection before, and I'd love to make it. So, like, saying the metaphor, right, is this thing that points to the bigger idea.
Yeah.
And so, like, humans engaging in writing and reading poetry are interested in this thing and what it represents to point to.
Yes.
And that seems parallel to the whole question of what it even means to be human in terms of being an image bearer.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, to bear the image of God really is in some ways to be a human, to be a metaphor, a living metaphor, pointing back to God himself. So,
that's really good.
Yeah.
No, and I also think of our whole, for all of English too, we're doing having travel well on life's journey.
Yeah.
And I think maybe a good way to think about it is poems as little signposts, road signs saying like, hey, steer this way. Or keep going. Or different ways that tap us into the ultimate goal, which is truth. Yeah. Right? And so when I think of poetry that way, that was actually what got me into it. I was like, man, this is a way, writing it and reading it is a way of getting a little bit closer to the end destination.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So poems as signposts, and sort of, and I think one of the things we'll talk about is the way that we encounter and approach a poem is similar to the best possible ways that we would approach another human.
Yeah, as living things.
Yeah, right? And don't we all want to be understood?
That's the goal.
That is the goal. Yeah.
So what I think this week and a half will look like for y'all watching this, and Ms. Ellis can clarify some things, is we found a selection of poems that kind of deal with poetry as a means of pilgrimage. So poetry as a means of traveling to fit with, what we've been doing this year, traveling towards truth. And Miss Ellis is kind of going to walk you guys through what does it look like to read a poem. Yeah. And so I think one of the most dangerous things as a student and as a teacher, this never goes away, I don't think, is you look at a poem and you feel like you're kind of an idiot.
Yeah.
This person is way above me, and your eyes do that thing where they glaze over and you just get to the period. You're like, I didn't get it, I never will, and you move on. Which is sad, because if you read a person like that, which we often do,
I know.
not a good way to read a person.
Right.
Or a poem.
Yeah.
So Miss Ellis is going to walk you guys through a little bit of like, hey, how do you do this thing? And there is an approach that is manageable, yet not cookie cutter, right? And so, we're going to elaborate on that, kind of your vision for the next week.
Yeah, I'd love to. Guys, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out some ways to take it slowly enough. Choose your metaphor, bite by bite, step by step,
sip by sip,
word at a time, whatever it is that's helpful for you to think about that, to show you that you really can approach and develop an understanding of really any poem set before you. And I think it's also important to say, again, like people, we can always understand the person before us better and more richly. That's not the same as knowing everything about them or having a totally
you don't need to say you get it.
Right, yeah, we're not going to solve people. We're not going to solve poems, right? Like, we're not just going to be done and set it aside. There's always more that they need. but helpful to have some approaches. So I really think there are 5 good questions to ask when approaching a poem, and to go through this slowly. And the first is just, what does it say? So the poem has actual words, and sometimes what we do is we try to jump to the meaning when we haven't actually listened to just say, what is it actually saying? We react, but we haven't paused to listen. So the first thing we'll do is we're just going to ask, what is it saying? We're going to look up words that aren't familiar. We're going to play around with the word order. We're going to do some things like that. The second question is, what does it show? Poems deal a lot with images. Poets are presenting to us a certain picture of the world and inviting us to come look. So we're going to take a look and say, what is this poet asking me to see, to visualize in my head, to have it in my imagination? We're going to ask, what connections does it make? Are there allusions or metaphors or similes that are part of the other parts of my experience as a human being that I can bring into this poem? We're also going to ask how it's arranged, right? So there's a certain order. Words come first, and then second, and then something comes later. Why that order? Why that setup? Poems often look kind of funny on the page, right? Really different. Yeah, right. So there's all that, and only after we've really walked through. What does it say? What does it show? What connections does it make? How is it arranged? Only then are we really ready to start asking the question, what does it mean? So we got to pause, and we got to take some patience and hold some things in this way, and not just jump to conclusions. With poems, just like with people.
Yeah.
And you're going to be spending some time.
I will be writing, reading, studying in depth poetry for the next 10 days.
There you are.
We're doing it with you.
That's right.
So each section, we're just going to dig into one of those questions and walk you through the process.
And when Mr. Harvey comes back,
you
will be able to ask him what he wrote, and you will be able to read it and understand his poetry and him more deeply.
Yeah, you'll get me in a whole different level.
So let's go.
Let's do it.
Perfect.